A blind woman had decided that night to end her life because she felt that God had forgotten her and the world had considered her useless and left her behind. The rain was pouring heavily, and on the city streets only the scream of the wind could be heard. As she stood at the edge of the bridge, gripping her cane tightly and lifting her face toward the sky, she said, "If you are truly there, then stop me." There was no light in her eyes, but in her heart the last spark of broken hope was still burning. Her name was Mariam, and she was not born blind. When she was 10 years old, a terrifying accident took away the light of her eyes, and from that day forward, her world sank into darkness. Her father had comforted her by saying that God has a purpose for everything. But when her father also left this world because of an illness, a storm of questions rose in Mariam's heart. She began to feel that prayers were only words that rise to the ceiling and fall back down again.
Years passed, and people gradually stopped helping her because the world admires the strong and forgets the weak. But what happened next began to test Mariam's patience, because even the church where she would go daily and sit quietly was shut down. She asked the pastor why God had taken her sight, but the only answer she received was, "Sometimes we do not understand." Those words did not become a balm for her wounds. Instead, they became another wound. One night, she sat in her room, touched her Bible, and said, "Jesus, if you gave sight to the blind, then why not me?" Her voice was breaking, but her question was directed straight toward heaven. She remembered the story in John 9, where Christ gave sight to a man born blind, and then she softly asked, "Will my time ever come?" In that moment, a slight peace settled into her heart, but the hardships of life were not yet over.
The next morning, she learned that she would be evicted from the house she was renting because she had not been able to pay the rent. That news was the final blow for her. She felt that darkness was not only in her eyes, but had filled her entire life. But what happened next began preparing to change the direction of the story, because that night, while Mariam stood on the bridge, she suddenly heard the scream of a child. The scream was coming from the middle of the water, and it was a small child crying out for help. Mariam wiped her tears and listened carefully, and without thinking, she threw her cane aside and ran toward the sound. People were standing at a distance, only watching, because the current was strong and the darkness was deep. But darkness was nothing new for Mariam, so she jumped into the river. The next morning, she learned that she would be evicted from the house she was renting because she had not been able to pay the rent. That news was the final blow for her. She felt that darkness was not only in her eyes, but had filled her entire life. But what happened next began preparing to change the direction of the story, because that night, while Mariam stood on the bridge, she suddenly heard the scream of a child. The scream was coming from the middle of the water, and it was a small child crying out for help. Mariam wiped her tears and listened carefully, and without thinking, she threw her cane aside and ran toward the sound. People were standing at a distance, only watching, because the current was strong and the darkness was deep. But darkness was nothing new for Mariam, so she jumped into the river. The water was freezing and the waves were pushing her back, but she grabbed the child's hand and began swimming toward the shore with all her strength. At that moment, she could not see anything, but she felt as if someone was swimming beside her. In her heart, she said, "Jesus, if you are with me, then give me strength." And then a strange power filled her body. People pulled both of them out, and the child was alive. Someone in the crowd said, "She is blind, yet she saved a life." Mariam was soaked and exhausted, but there was a new glow on her face. Suddenly, she felt a faint light before her closed eyes, as if a lamp had been lit behind the curtain of darkness. She tried to blink, and for the first time in years, she saw a faint shadow. Later, the doctor said that it was almost impossible, but sometimes shock or extreme conditions can cause dormant nerves to react. But Mariam knew that that night not only water was flowing, mercy was flowing as well. She looked toward heaven and softly said, "You never left me." In the following weeks, her sight gradually improved, but the greatest change happened in her heart. She understood that sometimes God uses our weakness to save someone else's life. If she had not been blind, perhaps she would have feared the darkness of the water, and perhaps she would not have jumped. She realized that her pain had not been meaningless. If today you are standing on some bridge in your life and you feel that everything is over, then remember that Christ saw darkness on the cross, but on the third day, light won. Your darkness is not the final truth. Your story is not finished yet. Sometimes the miracle is not getting your sight back, but receiving courage. Mariam's story teaches us that faith is born when evidence is not visible. When we are broken and still extend our hand to save someone else, God opens paths for us. Perhaps you are about to hear a child's cry. Perhaps you are about to become a miracle for someone. So today, if you feel that God has forgotten you, call out to Him the way Mariam did, because He works even in silence. If you believe that Jesus is alive and that He still transforms lives today, then write Amen in the comments and share this story so that light may reach another soul drowning in darkness.